Macron just humiliates himself on the world stage. And no, it is not related to Candace Owens, although that is what everybody seems to be talking about these days when it comes to Emmanuel Macron over in France. But today we are going to talk about how France has been kicked out of Africa. It is insane what's going on here. So he's really lost the narrative. We're going to talk about some of the domestic instability going on over in France right now, and perhaps something that he's doing to distract from what's happening in Africa, and how they're trying to get more involved in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, and trying to be a bridge from Asia to Europe. And so we're going to find out, is that just a distraction, or is that really a genuine pivot in what they're focusing on? So we're going to talk about some global implications for some of that as well. So let's dive right in. Now, I do got to say, I'm familiar with Emmanuel Macron. I don't have a very strong opinion of him. I would say I've talked a lot with Troy before this as well, and he also does not have a very strong opinion of him, very high opinion. And so we are going to go through some of this. He's really humiliated himself. And it seems like they have even lost the narrative. Like they can't even get into what they want to have coming out of this. So let's dive into some of these articles here. And I want to say first, so they got kicked out of Africa. So what does that mean? Well, basically, they had a counterterrorism mission that was happening in Sahel. That's a region in Africa. So I'm going to show this here. It's kind of this little band here you can see. And so they had a military footprint there for years, and they were, they had lots of influence. They were supposed to have lots of influence, but they have now pulled out of this region. In fact, been asked to leave this region in places like Niger and Mali. And so there was a Operation Barkhane that actually this was happening. Started as a counterterrorism mission, like I mentioned. And so that really morphed into a long, unpopular occupation. And so we've seen some of that playbook from some other countries, perhaps more Western countries, but it's not what needs to be happening. And so really, they finally ordered France out of these nations permanently. And what makes this even worse is that these same nations, they're not really falling into chaos. Like they're actually actively inviting the Russian-backed Wagner group and mercenaries and coming up with bilateral deals with Moscow and these other places. And so basically, France is being replaced militarily, diplomatically, and psychologically. And so this is pretty humiliating. They had some local celebrations in Niamey and another place there. It's fun to pronounce. Oh God, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. But these were, as these French troops were leaving, they were celebrating. And so it really just shows that they lost their legitimacy there. And so what we have is this really doesn't look, they're trying to say that, this is just a pivot. It's a planned pivot. This is, they called it a strategic rupture. Even his own defense minister said that. And so this is really going from an endless interference to a silent retreat. And so that's what they're calling this here. And so they're trying to say one by one, actually, they're trying to say that, let's see, I was trying to find the quote here. It says, this is from France's minister of France, Foreign Affairs, International Affairs. He says, I'm sorry to say, but it is no longer a concern for us. He's talking about the security challenges in that region. He said this to a reporter from Reuters when they asked about this ramifications of the withdrawal. And so it says, this is a far cry from when French President Emmanuel Macron denied that Paris had been thrown out of the Sahel, which is that region I showed. And they claimed that the country had instead opted to restructure its approach. And so Macron says, no, France is not on the back foot in Africa. It's just lucid and reorganizing itself. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to believe some of that, but I think we should maybe take that lightly. So now I have another thing here that we're going to talk about what they're doing over in Asia. But first, we need to talk about what's been happening in France. And so actually we saw they can't even handle security in their own nation. And so this is where it's kind of asking, how could they help these other nations when they can't even secure their own nation? And so if we look at what's been happening here, this article says Frexit, why Ivory Coast is joining African campaign to expel French troops. And so they said these former French allies are turning to Russian mercenaries, like I mentioned. And so there's an attack coming against all these people. And so we're going to see what's been happening. But this there was a stabbing on February 22nd, 2025 in France. And so that had one civilian killed, multiple officers injured, and it was a terror linked as well. And so they talk about the riot history and some of these different things that's been happening. And so let's see, from May 31st to June 1st of this year, it says this began as a celebration and it turned into a violent riot. And so that was celebrations from PSG's champions victory, and that descended into full-scale rioting. So they had over 500 arrests, nearly 200 injured, 2 fatalities, and hundreds of vehicles were torched nationwide. And so Macron condemned the violence, and the interior minister as well referred to them as barbarians. And so, but the thing is, I need to get another article up here that is going to show what they wanted to do, which was to actually, I'm trying to find this here. They tried to shut down social media. And so let's get this article over here. This happened back in 2023. They tried to shut down social media, and instead of dealing with the actual rioters themselves, that like be like, putting a fire out and maybe arresting the right people, just shutting down people from talking about it and spotlighting it. And so this happened back in, I think this is from 2023, but I want to say here, they also were pushing for a higher European Union, for the entire EU, to have rules for social media in the wake of some of these terror attacks. And this got even bigger because this is from the European Union. I'm trying to get this article up here. Strengthen the code of practice on disinformation. Can you believe it? Okay, so let's go ahead. France wants to be a leader in this, cracking down on disinformation. Not a fan. Well, I should say France is Macron, not necessarily France. The people of France are incredible. I've been there a few times myself and really enjoyed it, but that's why we need to have the right leadership there. You can't have this terrible leadership. And so, but you can see disinformation. What is disinformation? Well, probably disinformation is information, true or false, that the government or whoever's in charge of the disinformation monitoring doesn't want you to know. Okay. And so that's what disinformation is, according to their definition that I just came up with. But they want to shut this down. And so this is obviously not acceptable. And so they've got all this stuff happening. And the thing is, I mentioned they're also pivoting. Okay. So there's this contradiction happening. So he unveiled this bold new plan for France to help bridge Europe to Asia. So it's an Indo-Pacific strategy, and that aims to position France as a bridge between Europe and Asia, and they're increasing defense spending, I think, to 3% of their GDP. And so that's going to be increased, and they're increasing economic partnerships and multilateral diplomacy. So the question is, are they really going to bring global leadership to Asia after being rejected in Africa and being weakened at home? Or are they actually just trying to escape from failure and distract from what's happening over there? So over there in Africa and over in France. And so that perhaps is to be determined, but perhaps, perhaps what we saw happening in Africa is going to show also what's going to be happening here in what they're attempting to do with Asia. Hopefully not. Hopefully they can actually get this right, but I think we're right to question this. And so really we want to know if their domestic strength and credibility is going to be there or not? I mean, does he have these global ambitions? Are they set on shaky ground, or is it something that's going to actually go forward and be helpful for the region? So we see some of these core facts that are just hard to get away from. And so I think there's a couple other things I wanted to make sure we cover here before we sign off. But we saw that Africa turning toward Russia. We also see, obviously with the Belt and Road Initiative, China doing a lot in Africa. And so it's what they've been doing. But there's a lot of the truth that's coming out from that as well, where we see that they've been doing debt traps and taking advantage of Africa and all these kinds of things. And so what happened in Africa was it wasn't received as a partnership with France anymore. It was actually just seen as paternalism or colonialism, or whatever you want to call it, where the governments across those nations, they just see France involvement as patronizing and ineffective. And so that just comes from just that devolving of what was actually supposed to be something that was helpful. And so apparently not needed anymore. And they have this humiliating retreat, which they're trying to say is not a retreat. It's simply just a reorganization and a pivot. And so what do you think? Do you think this is simply a reorganization and a pivot? Or do you think that this is something that perhaps they were forced into or forced out of? And now they have this security crisis at home. They have their own credibility crisis. Are they going to be able to be successful in Asia? Well, it's going to be interesting to see what comes about, but they kind of are becoming irrelevant in some of these areas. So perhaps being able to refocus on these other ones will help them be relevant again on the world stage. So they're acting unilaterally in some of these cases. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes. So make sure you put what you think in the comments, and make sure you stay tuned for more videos coming out this weekend, and we'll be back live next week. Thank you for joining, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon. God bless.